Thank you very much for coming to my talk. My name is Alan Baranov, and I am presenting on what I learned about compliance moving to Australia and what you can learn too. All right, so who am I? Alan Baranov. I'm an ex-South African living in Melbourne, Australia. I have roughly 20 years of experience in information security. I am a senior consultant in GRC for Cyber CX. GRC being governance, risk, and compliance. I am a QSA and I have a CISSP. I help CISOs, security leaders, sometimes IT, sometimes finance, to meet their obligations in terms of governance, risk, and compliance. Or also general advice. I have a technical background, so I started in Linux and networking before I moved into security, and I am SAPSA certified, so architecture experience as well. This is the outside of my house in South Africa. It's changed a bit since I was there, but the point of the matter is you can see it's a tall wall. It has electric fencing on top of it, electric gate. So yeah, very, very much secure. And that is standard pretty much for houses across the more affluent areas of South Africa, at least. I love the country, and I love being there. I miss it every single day. I can't wait to go back and visit it, to do some touring, and I highly advise that people do. But the point of the matter is that you are living with crime pretty much every day. Now, one of the places I used to work was in the city, and I used to catch the bus and look at kind of inner urban life. It was amazing to see. So this is an example of some people going into behind those windows is a butchery. So you'd go in there, buy your meat, and you'd come out and you'd actually barbecue it right there at the butchery. Lovely. So I love the innovation of African cities. Here's a place where you would go to apply for work. So a lot of people, basically, if you need a job, you have to apply online. A lot of people don't have computers that they can use to apply online. So you'd go into an internet cafe and use their computers there, making a plan. But there is a bit of a darker element there, is that you've got a lot of people who are out of work would come to these internet cafes. They'd be pretty desperate, and you'll see adverts on the outside there, and I can bet you a couple of those at least will say, listen, if you want to make some quick bucks, here's how you can do it. And of course, then that's how they get people to help them with their phishing scams and their spam, etc. So it's there is that dark element, and the point I guess that I'm getting to is that if you live in a country with this, you'll understand that there are adversaries. Crime itself, even online crime, it doesn't become this kind of academic thing. It becomes something that you are aware of. So I moved to Australia, and what is Australia? It's the Commonwealth of Australia. It's the Australian continent. Has a little island at the bottom there called Tasmania, and then several smaller islands as well. Where will you find it on a map? You'll find it at the top, obviously. And well, I mean, this map might not be terribly accurate because basically the world is round and there is no actual top. Where will you find it on a DEF CON sticker? You'll find it at the bottom right. What you won't find on a DEF CON sticker is New Zealand. Sorry, New Zealand. Okay, moved to Australia. This was my door, very different to what the other house was. There's no lock on the gate. There's no huge walls. There's no electric fencing. And pretty much if you took a good strong kick to that door, you'd probably get into it. If not, there's a huge glass pane to the left of it that you could get through. So yeah, very different. Here, crime is not on your mind all the time. And so that kind of changes a bit of your psyche. So if you're doing compliance, it's helpful to remember, listen, what we're doing actually has real world impact. It will make you safer if you do the right thing. So jumping on to compliance in Australia, not necessarily Australian compliance standards, but compliance in Australia. We'll start with PCI. So wait a second, you might be asking me, PCI is international, right? Of course it is. But every country does have its own real world challenges. So in Australia, we have the Australian Payments Network, and they are actually pretty much very much, they're actually stricter than PCI and their requirements. So if you meet their requirements, especially around, for example, the point of sale terminals and the actual payment where you tap your cards or make a payment, it actually makes life a lot easier for you. The other thing to note in Australia is that we're very much more aligned to Europe in terms of chip and pin. So skimming here is almost a non-issue. If you look at the graph on the left-hand side, that gray bit is skimming, whereas the blue bit is online fraud. So we have our own challenges here. Mostly what we would have to look at is how to protect our web sites and transactions made through that. In the US, of course, in 2015, if you look at the graph at the bottom, it's pretty much 50-50, and online is going up, whereas skimming is coming down. And so it's a different world. My point being that even when you have an international standard, there are certain regional challenges that you need to address. Okay, so speaking of which, then a lot of organizations in Australia do use the ISO standard. It's kind of the default that you would probably go to if you aren't required to meet a different standard. And so there definitely is a lot of ISO 27000 happening in Australia. And of course, NIST. There are parts of NIST that actually make a lot of sense and don't make sense to rewrite. So for example, incident response, a lot of organizations use the NIST standard for incident response just because it's really good. And why not? Okay, so jumping a little bit deeper into what Australia is all about, I'm going to look mostly at Victoria, which is where I live, which the capital city is Melbourne. There's also New South Wales, which has Sydney in it. You might know Sydney from the bridge or the Opera House, or Finding Nemo takes place in, takes place primarily in Sydney. And then there's also the tiny circle on the picture there. That is the Australian Capital Territory, which has the capital of Australia, which is called Canberra. If you're not sure which city you're in, you kind of wake up and it's like, well, which city am I in? Just go buy yourself a cup of coffee. Melbourne has excellent coffee and a beautiful coffee shop or laneway vibe. Sydney has Fastwell coffee. It's a large city. Canberra has no good coffee, and I'm sorry. But it is the capital. So Australian compliance. So each of these different states usually has their own law. The laws are pretty similar. And then on top of that, they'll have their own policies. How does all this work? Generally, one of the states will decide that they need, say, for example, a privacy law, or maybe the federal government decides they need a privacy law. They'll go overseas and have a look and see what best practices are, and then they'll type out their own version using this keyboard. Yeah, basically Control C and Control V, and then basically, yeah, we have our Privacy Act. And then the states will typically follow and use the same keyboard. Not quite. They do make slight changes, which is more frustrating than just having one standard. So yeah, we end up with about 7 different standards, 7 different policies, 7 different laws and 7 different policies, and then probably 7 different standards, which are based on all of that. Yeah, it makes life difficult, but it is what it is. Now the question is if you okay, so these apply to federal agencies, uh, and if you're a federal agency, you should know that you're a federal agency, and you should know what it is that your requirements will be. However, it does also apply to usually some of their suppliers. So if you're a big supplier of a government agency, whether they're state or federal, you may yourself need to, at the very least, understand what their requirements are, but also you might need to do them yourself. Okay, so jumping across onto the federal framework. So this is not a law, this is the policy framework that you need to adhere to if you are a government agency, or again, working with government agency. I don't expect you to read everything on this graph. It is very small, and that's the only thing to note is that each column here is something that you need to do. There's 16 different columns. We'll take a look at 2 of them. So you'll see that they mention 2 documents that you need to, or 2 other documents that you need to look at to become compliant. The first one is the Australian Signals Directorate, or the ASD, Strategies to Mitigate Cybersecurity Incidents. And the other one is the Australian Government Information Security Manual. We'll dig deeper into what these are. Looking at, for example, the New South Wales version of that same document. So if you're a New South Wales government organization or working with one, these are the 25 different things that you need to do. One of them will be implement the ACSC Essential 8. Okay, so what is all this about, I wonder? All right, so we'll take a look at the Australian Government Information Security Manual, because I don't want to spend way too much time on it. We'll just dig into it, and then we'll look at the other documents. So the ISM is a document. It comes also with supporting tools, for example, Excel spreadsheets. And yeah, we in our GRC love our Excel spreadsheets so that you can tick stuff off, because we love ticking stuff off. So the ISM is a document. It's a security manual. It basically comes with every single security control that you could possibly hope to think about, as well as some that you could possibly hope not to think about. And it is very good. So each one of them has a control, why you do the control, what the actual purpose is there, and then of course what your outcome should be. So for in this particular example, remove someone's access the same day that he no longer or she no longer needs legitimate requirement for that access. I like it. It's good. It has clear language and good guidance. There's a lot of work you can see that has gone into this document. My one concern with the document is that it was prescriptive before, so it used to tell you you must do this or you should do this, whereas they've now removed that language from it. So it's just a list of different controls, and the expectation is that the organization itself will decide what it should and shouldn't do, which is a bit dangerous, I would imagine, for some organizations. I don't know, maybe people argue with me about whether it's a good idea or not. The other thing about it, which is also a blessing and a curse, is that it is updated on a monthly basis. So it becomes difficult. It's like a moving target that you need to try and hit. On the other hand, it's always fresh and up to date. Even if you have nothing to do with Australia, I would highly recommend you download this document and take a look at it. It's a good document, and even just for the clarity that they put into it, I would just basically recommend you have a look at it. The other one that was mentioned in the PSPF, the federal document, is the Australian Signals Directorate Strategies to Mitigate Cybersecurity Incidents. lot of words there. But basically, what it is roundabout. Uh, slide is a little bit off center. Okay. So back around about 2010, uh, the ASDS, uh, call them the ASD, they did have a different name at that time. They were helping organizations to mitigate attacks that had actually happened. So the ASD being similar to the American NSA, they were collecting stats of these attacks and basically came up with a set of controls that, had they been there, would have mitigated the attacks that they saw. They came up with a list of 35 controls, and that's what this document is. Now, there's no kind of explanation on how you should do it. Just here's what you should do, and these are the controls that you probably should be doing. One of the things that they found, which was quite interesting, is that out of all of the different controls, 85% of the intrusions that they detected were using unsophisticated techniques. And of those 85, they would have been mitigated by implementing just 4 of the mitigation strategies. And we'll jump into what those 4 are. Okay, so application whitelisting, patch applications, and patch operating systems, as well as restrict administrative privileges. That kind of makes sense. So obviously, patching applications is something that we've known is important forever. And patching operating systems, same sort of thing. Application whitelisting, that's a bit of a different one. That's fairly new technology. And if you speak to anyone in government that's in information security, or as the government calls it, cyber security, you will know that they have very strong opinions on application whitelisting and how it should be done. It's not easy. Restrict administrative privileges, also not terribly easy to go to your top people and say, listen, we don't trust you with your computer anymore. And of course, when you have developers, they always want to install weird stuff. I've used the top 4, and I absolutely do think that organizations should put these controls near the top of what they're doing. I worked for an organization. We started tackling the top 4, and when NotPetya came through, we had patched our operating systems to the point where it was not a big deal. That said, I do have a couple of concerns with the document. And yeah, I did make a promise to myself I'll use at least one overused image in my deck. And this is it. If you've never seen this image before, then where have you been? Probably Google it and see what it means. The point of the matter is that whenever you're using statistics to create something, you have to understand the statistics. And the ASD was using missing controls to create that list, so they didn't take into consideration the controls that were actually working, and prevented any other attacks that weren't on their list. So, for example, in the top 4, you don't have having a firewall is not in there. And stuff like awareness activities is not in there, and those 2 things I think are very important controls, even though they're not on the list. So definitely understand where this list is coming from. The other thing, of course, as I said, there's 35 different controls, and they've chosen to focus on 4 of them. So it's difficult as a security leader, and probably the biggest challenge that you might have is working out where to focus your attention. You know, in a government organization, they have to do these 4 things. They are going to be judged on them. They do need to show compliance to them, but they absolutely can't miss out on all the other controls as well. Okay, yeah, and speaking of focus, take a look at this dog. It has no purpose in this talk. Just take a second, breathe, And continue. Okay, so just to recap at this point. So compliance is not just a technicality. There needs to be a purpose. There are real world attackers out there. And even if you can't see them, just know that they're there. It, even something as standard as PCI can be different depending on where you are. There's regional differences. Um, Australia has a ton of laws and standards. Basically, every different state, as well as the federal government, has its own uh, laws, its own policies, its own standards. And if you're an outside organization, working from the US with an Australian company, you'll be told exactly which one you need to take a look at. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. My recommendation is take a look at the ISM, the Information Security Manual. It has good content. It really and truly does. And even if you don't have anything to do with Australia, just take a look at it. You can use some of that for yourself. I'm pretty sure of it. Okay, so there's a set of 4 things that you should be doing according to the ASD. Uh, they're colloquially known as the ASD top 4. They're not easy. So what does the government do when something's not easy? Well, apparently in this case, they double it. So they've given us now the Essential 8, and that's its official name is Essential 8. So they've taken the top 4 and added another 4 controls. So the original list was aimed at, general attacks against organizations. With the Essential 8, they've actually come up with 3 different areas that they want to concentrate on. So number 1 is prevent malware delivery and execution. Number 2 is limit the extent of cybersecurity incidents. And number 3 is recover data and system availability. Yeah, I mean, it does make sense. Like when the original list was put out, there wasn't so much ransomware, or at least it wasn't something that was on the top of everyone's lists and front of everyone's minds. And it is definitely something that we are concerned with now. So it makes sense for them to have updated the list. So what do they have in all of these different things? So as I said, the top 4 is still there. So they will still have application whitelisting. That's not going away. There's also now patch applications. Again, also was in the top 4 and is still there. Still makes sense. Configure Microsoft Office for macros. Okay, so don't use macros if you can, or if you need to, make sure that they're digitally signed or have some sort of plan in place. You don't necessarily need to get rid of them altogether. Some of them can be quite useful, but you do need to manage them. That's a new one. And then user application hardening. So for example, if you install an application, try and get rid of anything in it that is not required. So for example, the example that they give here is like Flash or Java or ads. May not be a good idea to have on a computer. If you can get rid of them, please do that. So those are your first 4. For the first scenario. Then for the second scenario, you've got another 3 controls. So there's restrict administrative privileges. Again, that comes out of the top 4. We've seen that before. Patch operating systems, again from the top 4. And they've added in multi-factor authentication, which is a new one for this list. Makes sense. Passwords are being cracked and people use passwords in multiple places. It's not safe anymore. So having a good second factor of authentication makes a lot of sense. And then the third one, which is to be able to restore if something does go wrong, is of course to have daily backups. I mean, you could have a better DR solution in place, but this is definitely the minimum of what you want to do. I like them. I like these top 8 controls. Same issues apply. I understand that these are responsive. There may be other controls that you need to look at, and your focus may need to be elsewhere. But these definitely, for someone who is looking for, I'm new. What do I do? Where do I even start? What should I make my priority? These 8 are definitely a good start. I do like them. Now, the other document that they introduced at the same time, well, subsequent to it, but also based on the same content, is what they call the Essential 8 Maturity Model. Um, it takes the same list. My concern with it is I do like it, and I'll show you why I like it. My concern is that it's not a real true maturity model. I came across the C2M2 standard, so that's a standard that comes from the US Department of Energy, which I really and truly like. And in C2M2, for example, they define their different levels of maturity, and they base it on your practices. So if you're not doing any practices, then you get 0. If you are doing ad hoc processes, you get 1, and if you document them and have a proper approach to them, you get 2, and if you have policies and effectiveness, etc., then you'll have 3. Very standard maturity model. The key being, of course, that you're looking at the processes and the maturity of those processes. So the Essential 8 doesn't really talk about processes, it talks about the outcomes. And that's why I don't think it's a very good maturity model, but I do think it's a very good standard to have in place. So for example, for application control, you may have, so in this case, it gives you a list of all the different things that you may want to block. And yeah, and allowed and blocked executions on workstations are logged. So, and that would be, for example, level 1, and then level 2, you'll have extra requirements that you would need to have in place. All of which is very, very well thought out. So you've got your Essential 8, and for each one of those, you've got 3 different levels of what you can expect to do for each of those levels. And I definitely think it's well thought out, even if it's not really a maturity model. I have to throw that in there. Okay, so if you're a security leader, and even if you don't deal with Australian companies, if you're looking for inspiration, you're looking for a pathway, you're looking for a guide, I would highly recommend that you look at the ISM document just for its clarity and its language, and for an explanation of all the different things. I would look at the Essential 8 to see what it is that you probably should be doing, the most important things to do. And I would look at the Essential 8 maturity model to see kind of what the expectation is of what you should be getting out of the Essential 8. Other thing, go have a look at South Africa. It's a beautiful country. Definitely do tour it. Go widen your world. And if once you're done there, come to Melbourne. I'll buy you a coffee. Thank you very much. I hope you got something out of this. Yeah, there are good documents that the Australian government has provided. They're all kind of out there. They're open source. You can copy from them. You can use them as you need. Please make a plan to do that. Thank you very much to the village for allowing me to speak. And I hope you have a great day for the rest of your day. If you need to reach out to me, you can do so on Twitter at a Baranov, or on my LinkedIn at Alan Baranov. And yeah, hope to hear from you. Thank you very much.